warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du, fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. In yesterday's dars, I was talking about the signs of the latter days, as has been mentioned in the Holy Quran by Allah the Almighty, and we have gotten to verse number 7 of Surah At-Takwir. I had already covered, I believe, 7 or 8 signs that have been mentioned that talk about this very time period through which we are passing through, the time of the promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam. Although the theme of today's dars is signs of the latter days from the Ahadith, but since the topic from yesterday is still ongoing, so I'll first try to finish the topic from the Holy Quran, and then inshallah ta'ala I will try to shed light on the same subject matter from the Hadith afterwards. So verse number 8 of Surah Takwir is وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ verse number 8 is وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, and when people are brought together. There was a time when the way communication used to take place between one person and another person, and they used to be at a quite a distance from one another. It used to happen through writing letters. Then technology advanced and we got telegram, and then the telephone, and then as time progressed, we were introduced to different modes of technology, different methods through which we communicate. One of the advancements that science made, technology made, was in the form of internet, which brought us even closer than before. So building up on that, when we look at the technological advancement that mankind has made within the span of the last 150 years, it's remarkable where we were and where we have ended up today. I'll give you a very short example to contemplate over. About 20 years ago, those of us who had migrated from Pakistan or elsewhere and we had families back home, in order to contact them, we used to buy these calling cards. They used to cost $10 or $15 or so, and you could only get maybe 20-30 minutes of time to call your family using those calling cards. And with the passage of time, now nobody is using those calling cards. Instead, everybody has WhatsApp. And there was a time when even with WhatsApp, you could only text message one another. But then technology further advanced and you were able to now make phone calls from one WhatsApp user to another WhatsApp user. And then a little while ago they added the feature of making a video call, and now they have added the feature of having video conference call. So the point that I'm making is that Allah Ta'ala mentioned in this verse that would be the time of the Messiah and the Mahdi, when people would be brought together. And look how beautifully this prophecy has been fulfilled. There's so many different ways through which Allah has brought us together. Cultures have been brought together. The gap has been bridged. There was a time, as I was saying, where if somebody wanted to send a message to another person, at times it would take weeks, if not months, to get the message to the other person. I remember watching a documentary on MTA. It was about the life of our present Huzur, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Khamis Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz, and in it, Huzur mentioned how he received the news about the birth of his daughter. He was in Africa, his family was in Pakistan, and he found out that Allah has blessed him with a daughter through the news clipping which was published in Al-Fazl. And that Al-Fazl reached him in Africa, in Ghana. And that's how he found out that he has been blessed by Allah the Almighty. Now fast forward now, there's a young Jamia Canada graduate who just graduated this year. He was in a meeting with Huzur Anwar Aidahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, and he was also blessed with a daughter while he was traveling. So while he was in I believe UK, his family was back in Canada, and his wife gave birth to their daughter. So he was having this mulaqat, and he mentioned to Huzur that, Huzur, we wanted to experience what you and your wife experienced. So I also had my child while I was away from home. And you found out about your daughter through Al-Fazl. So we are trying to experience something similar. So Huzur smiled, and Huzur said to him, but now you have WhatsApp. That now you don't have to rely on Al-Fazl, the way he back then relied on Al-Fazl to get the news about him. So this is a very small example of how the cultures have been bridged, how people, nations have come together. Now of course, with the advancement of modes of transportation as well, it has become super easy for people to travel to another country, to another nation, to experience their culture. It used to take at times weeks and at times months to travel from one part or one continent to go to the other continent. But now, literally, it's a matter of not even days. If you take a flight, you can get from one end to the other end of the world in about 20 hours or so, or maybe 22 hours. So now those long distances have been shortened. And this was the sign which was mentioned about the advent of Imam Mahdi and Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. Now the next sign from Surah Takwir, which I would like to share with all of you, is in verse number 9. Allah Ta'ala says, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ. And the translation is, and when the girl child buried alive is questioned about, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. For what crime was she killed? For what crime was she killed? Now this is the sign which talks about the emergence of women rights associations or women rights movements that bring to the light the question about the suffering of women in our society. Thinking about women's rights in the western part of the world or the eastern part of the world, up until very recently, was considered a taboo. Unfortunately. But now, by the grace of Allah, we see that the rights of women are being restored to them. And hence you see different women organizations, various organizations that are working towards the upliftment of women in society. Again, this verse stands witness to the truthfulness of the Holy Quran. Then the next sign which is mentioned is captured in verse number 11, wherein Allah the Almighty says, وَإِذَا الصُّحُفُ نُشِرَتْ. And when the books are spread abroad. Now this verse is talking about the invention of modern day press. Books used to be handwritten. Centuries ago, that's how books were written. If you go back a millennia or 2 millennia, there were still books. There were books at the time of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. There were books at the time of, prophets that came even before him. But there was no printing press. Those books were handwritten. Now, we find mention of a form of printing press in Chinese culture. But they used to use these clay blocks. that they used to imprint on. But now, as we move forward in time, we saw the invention of modern day printing press. At the time of the Prophet Islam, we see it in basic form. And now fast forward to today, and we see so many different kinds of technologies are out there that help us print. Now, you can print millions of books within the span of weeks. Whereas back in the days, and I'm referring to a few centuries ago, books were considered luxury. They were considered as something that could only be owned or afforded by those who were well-to-do in a society. Mind you, it used to take a lot of time to handwrite or copy a manuscript of a book. And in a given country, only a certain copy of a certain book could exist. And now, literally with the click of a single button, you can print books in your own home using your own printer. So this is how this prophecy has been fulfilled. But this prophecy could also be looked at in another way. As-suhuf literally means scriptures. If one was to take as-suhuf as books that have been printed against the religion of Islam, then we see that around the time of the Prophet Messiah Islam, around the time I'm talking about 1880s, millions upon millions of books had been published and widespread across the globe by Orientalists that were polemical in nature and would speak against Islam, against the truthfulness of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, against the Quran, and against Allah the Almighty. Prophet Messiah Islam has given a figure in one of his books, how many books had been published by that time against Islam by Oriental scholars. If somebody was to take the As-Suhuf, which is mentioned here, as the Bible, for example, then around the same time as the Prophet Messiah Islam, again we're going back to the same century, and this was the theme that we kept witnessing again and again, even yesterday, that all these signs kept being fulfilled around the same time as Hazrat Masih Maud. So we see that Bible was widespread around the same time that the Prophet Messiah claimed that he is sent from Allah the Almighty to defend Islam, to lead Islam. Again, this could also be taken as a prophecy about the Holy Quran as well. And we see how the copies of the Holy Quran that have now been printed are in billions, if not millions, many, many more. Again, fulfilling this prophecy that this would be the time, broadly speaking, this would be the time in which the emergence or the coming of the Messiah and the Mahdi would take place. Now, the next sign from the Quran, and this would be the last sign which I would cover from the Quran. Although there are many, many more, but I think this last sign, it would suffice for today. Allah the Almighty says, وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ كُشِطَتْ, and when the heaven is laid bare. Now, kushitat literally means when you remove the curtain from something, or if something has a leather covering and you remove from it. So in other words, Allah the Almighty is saying that right now, when in the context of the 7th century Arabia, when these verses were being revealed, Allah the Almighty was saying that right now your knowledge is only limited. When you look towards the sky, you can only see a limited amount of things that are out there in the space. But a time will come, and that would be the time when Imam Mahdi and the Messiah would appear in this world. That would be the time when the curtain from the heavens would be removed, from the sky would be removed. In other words, now you will be able to see through. You will be able to see through the skies. Look how beautifully this prophecy was fulfilled. The invention of telescope, which started from Galileo in its very rudimentary form, and then look at its one of the most advanced forms in the shape of the Hubble telescope. Few years ago, NASA was able to capture the deep space image of our universe. If you Google this, you'll realize that it is the most heavy in terms of its size. It's the largest picture that has ever been captured. It's God knows how many gigabytes. And it shows you an in-depth view of our universe. And you can see millions of galaxies. And our galaxy, the Milky Way, is literally represented by a single small dot on that picture. A single small dot. That's it. Forget about our planet. Forget about the solar system. I'm saying the entire galaxy of which we are part of was represented on that picture by a single dot in one of the corners. So this is how this prophecy has been fulfilled. That the curtain of the sky has been removed and now we can see through. So these were the signs, some of the signs that I have covered, which talk about the era in which the Messiah and the Mahdi was supposed to come. Now I'm going to share some of the signs from the books of Ahadith, from the statements of the Holy Prophet ﷺ that talk about this era. Some of these signs overlap, while some others are not overlapping. So I will try my level best to skip the signs that overlap and mention the signs which do not overlap. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani radiyallahu anhu, the second caliph to the promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam, wrote a book in, I believe, 1920s. And the book is titled Da'watul Amir. It has been translated into English. It's called Invitation to Ahmadiyya. And this book was primarily addressed to the king of Afghanistan. And in this book, the Khalifatul Masih Sani radiyallahu anhu, he mentioned how the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is indeed the Imam Mahdi, the Masih Maud that the Muslim world has been waiting for. That reformer that the entire world has been waiting for. And then he laid different arguments in that book. And one of the chapters or one of the arguments which Huzur made was about the signs of the latter days, as has been captured by the Islamic scripture. So he mentions a few signs from the Quran, and then he mentions some of the signs from the books of Ahadith that have been fulfilled. So one point to keep in mind is that our non-Ahmadi brothers and sisters, they often conflate these signs with the judgment day. They think that these signs would appear right before the judgment day. So for example, if tomorrow, let's say, is judgment day, they're of the opinion that these signs would appear right before judgment day. Whereas we see that these signs have already been fulfilled. So we know that this could not be about Qiyamat Kubra. This could not be the signs that talk about the final day, the judgment day, when the entire universe would be wrapped up. And that would be the end of everything. And then Roz Hashr will take place. So this is why it's very important that it's explained that these signs are not related to the judgment day, but rather with the coming of the Messiah and Imam Mahdi. And when a prophet of Allah comes in this world, when a reformer comes in this world, that in a way is also like a judgment day. It's also like a Qiyamah. This is why the scholars of Islam throughout ages have been calling the era in which the Imam Mahdi would appear, or an era in which a prophet of Allah comes, they call that era Qiyamat al-Sughra, which literally means smaller Qiyamah, the smaller judgment day. Why? Because when a prophet of Allah appears, you start to see two camps being formed. One of the believers and the other of the disbelievers. So So something similar which would happen on the day of judgment, where you will have a group of believers and then you will have a group of disbelievers. And then those whom Allah wants to forgive, they will go to paradise and benefit from the bounties of God. And those whom Allah Ta'ala wants to punish, they would go to hell and they would be punished accordingly. So similar thing happened at the time when a Prophet of Allah comes, whereby those who accept him enjoys the rewards from Allah the Almighty in this world and the hereafter. And those who reject the Prophet and persecute him and his community, they're not only punished in the hereafter, but they're also punished in this world as well. So this is why it's very important to understand that these signs which have been mentioned in the Quran and also in the Hadith, they are for the most part are talking about that time in which Mahdi and Masih Maud was to come. So one of the signs that Holy Prophet ﷺ has mentioned in his Ahadith is that when the Mahdi would appear, when the Masih Maud would appear, that would be the time when Christians would be in greater number and Christianity would be the dominant faith of the world. In other words, Islam would be in a very weak position. Now this point has been somewhat explained to me yesterday as well, that when Hazrat Masih Maud came, when Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad came, at that time Islam was being attacked from the right and the left. From every single place Islam was being attacked. As I mentioned, millions upon millions of books were published against Islam and against Holy Prophet ﷺ, against the Quran, against the entity, against the being of Allah the Almighty. And then comes promised Messiah Islam, and then he defends Islam in such a unique way as has never been defended before, after the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, of course. This was the reason why the man who opposed him the most, Maulvi Muhammad Hussain Batalvi, in his own newspaper, he had to admit when the promised Messiah Islam wrote the book Brahini-e-Anbiya. He said, in the last 13, 14 centuries of Islam, no one has rendered such a huge and great service to the religion of Islam as has been rendered by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian alayhi salatu wasalam. So, the prophecy was that when the Messiah and Mahdi would emerge, at that time the dominant faith of the world would be Christianity, and Christians will be in greater in numbers and also would hold the power. Now, in the books of Hadith, the wordings have been that Ahle Rum, people of Rum or people of Rome, would be the ones who would be in greater numbers. Now, in the context of the 7th century in which this statement was being made by Holy Prophet ﷺ, Ahle Rum or Romans were literally the Christians. So, in this context, we know that Holy Prophet ﷺ was talking about Christians here. The Holy Prophet ﷺ also talked about the condition of Muslims of that time. Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned that many of the Muslims would deny the concept of qadar, predestination. They would deny the concept of qadar. And we see many Muslims today either have no knowledge of it, or those who are of philosophical bent think that the concept of qadar, as has been explained by Islam, is futile, that it does not make any sense. So again, we see these prophecies being fulfilled. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was that in that time, the time of the Mahdi and the Messiah, the Muslims would consider paying of the zakat as a heavy form of tax. Again, spending in the way of Allah Ta'ala is considered by many as something which is burdensome. Even though, if you think about it, every single thing that you own and I own is given to us by Allah the Almighty. If you are a successful businessman, or if you are an intelligent innovator, if you are a doctor, it doesn't matter what profession you hold. If you are successful in that field, you might be thinking that maybe it's the intellect you have, or maybe it's the hard work that you've put into this. But who gave you the intellect to begin with? Who gave you the eyes with which you see, or the mind with which you think, the hands with which you operate, the legs with which you walk? All these things are given to you and to me by Allah the Almighty. I remember one of my colleagues gave a very beautiful example. One year, there was a group of Waqfin children that were visiting Jamia Canada from USA. And one of my classmates had to give a speech to them. And it was around the topic of waqf, devoting your life for the sake of God. And he gave this example. He said, look, I'm wearing this pen. I have this pen on my jacket. And he said, this pen was given to me by Khalifatul Masih, Ayyadahullah bin Aziz. Now imagine if I go back to Khalifatul Masih to see him and I present that pen back to him as a gift. And then he says, did I do something which is worthy of being mentioned in a good way? Obviously not. He says, now think about it. This life is given to us by Allah the Almighty. And if I present this life back to Allah the Almighty, that here, oh Allah, I'm dedicating my life for the sake of your religion and for your sake, I'm not doing anything. It's barely, evening out the score. Allah gave us something and we're returning it back to Him. And even that is not done entirely. So, when you think about that, you realize that Allah is the one who has given us everything, but at times we think that maybe if we spend back in the way of Allah Ta'ala, it would be difficult. Or my own personal expenses would not be met. Whereas this kind of mentality itself serves as the fulfillment of this prophecy, this hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, whereby he mentioned that in that time when the Messiah and the Mahdi was to appear in this world, the Muslims of that time would consider paying off the zakat as a heavy burden, as a tax. Another sign that the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has mentioned is that in that time the scholars of Islam would sell the religion. The scholars of Islam would sell the religion. Sometimes they sell the religion for the sake of gaining some power. Sometimes they literally sell it for the sake of fame, or at other times they do this so that they can make some money. There is a cleric, a mullah in Pakistan, who is apparently the chief of the Ulama Council in Pakistan. And he had the audacity to get drunk and then go on live TV and give interviews. And I believe he has done this at multiple occasions. And yet he is somehow seen as the representative of the religion of Islam. At least in Pakistan he is. So this is the condition. This is what Holy Prophet ﷺ was talking about. That would be the time when the scholars would be selling the name of Islam. Almost every few weeks I read in different newspapers and different social media outlets that certain clerics have abducted certain children and have committed heinous acts against those innocent children. And then when they get caught, they say, oh, Satan had taken over them. They make such excuses. But this is the state of affairs. This is their morality. This is their spiritual level, whereby they're literally beasts in sheep's clothing. Again, fulfilling the hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Another sign which Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was that in that time, the Muslims would try to offer salat quickly. Muslims would try to offer salat quickly. Do we not see that happening? Whereby a person comes to masjid and his main thought at the back of his mind is, how quickly can the prayer start so that I can get out of here? As if staying in the masjid and coming to masjid is somehow, God forbid, a curse. God forbid if we ever have to wait for the imam. It's like one of the most difficult things. Now, few weeks ago, there was a Q&A session of some young students with Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz. And one of the questioners asked a question related to Salah. And Hazur mentioned this, and Hazur said, nowadays, you're all about offering Salat as quickly as possible. He actually made a statement in Punjabi. I might get it wrong, but it was something along the lines that now, you say to your friend, give me 5 minutes, and I'll quickly go offer my prayers and I'll be back. 5 minutes mein namaz padh ke wapas aaya. Hazur commented, it would take you more than 5 minutes just to even finish Surah Fatiha. Think about that for a second. The salat that our beloved Imam Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahullah offers, where when he is reading it by himself, when he is reading his nawafil, or even the first salah, he takes his time. Everything is rushed. Everything is fast-paced in his life. But when we come to the worship of Allah, everything gets put on hold and he prays to Allah Ta'ala as if literally there is no tomorrow. So, if we look around our own selves, we see how this hadith is being fulfilled every day. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ had mentioned was, Us waqt Quran ut jayega. That people would read Quran, but Quran would not go down their throat, meaning they would not really act on it. They would read it, but they wouldn't really act on it. They would memorize it, they would recite it beautifully, melodiously, but acting upon it would be absent. They would write it in beautiful calligraphy. Again, we see all these things happening. And we also see how Quran is literally being discarded. There is a verse in the Holy Quran where Allah the Almighty mentioned that a time will come when the soul of the Holy Prophet ﷺ will say, Ya Rabbi, O my Allah, O my Lord, Inna qawm ittakhazu hadha al-Qur'ana mahjura. Surely my people, Muslims, have discarded the Quran, have thrown away the Quran as if it is a thing to be discarded. Now, of course, Muslims do not throw the Quran, but how have they thrown away the Quran? By way of not acting on its teachings. Again, we see that prophecy being fulfilled in this day and age. The next sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, he said, in that time, mosques will be embellished. Masajid would be embellished with different kinds of, not just calligraphy, but paintings and different kinds of gold ornaments and whatnot. Go to the Middle East. Go to the Middle East and see these multi-million dollar projects that they build. And then look at how extravagant the masajid are. This hadith does not stop us from putting calligraphy in the masajid. But this hadith is talking about how extravagant people would become. Only to come to the masjid so that they can quickly offer the prayer and leave. That's the irony. There is a mosque in Abu Dhabi. The mosque is dedicated to King Zayed. And if you Google it, you can see its pictures from the inside. And they show you the kind of carpet they have, the kind of chandeliers they have, and the gold calligraphy that they've done. So on and so forth. Different kind of things. Literally fulfilling what is mentioned in the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned is that at that time the Arabs would be far removed from the religion of Islam. That their spiritual condition, their moral condition would have deteriorated. I don't have to necessarily go into too much detail. Let me give you just a couple of examples. One of the Saudi princes, he was in news, I believe, not too long ago, that he was I think, visiting USA or one of the Western countries, and he was visiting a gambling casino where he not only lost how many, maybe a couple $100 million in a single night, he lost five of his wives as well. Think about that. 5 wives are not even allowed in Islam. He is a Saudi prince. And somehow in this day and age, Saudi Arabia is being associated, or the royal family is associated with representing Islam. And this is their own condition. There are documentaries upon documentaries on YouTube that anybody can watch that talks about how the Saudi royal family is leading Saudi Arabia and how they are personally living their life. The life of opulence. Holy Prophet ﷺ used to say, Al-Faqru Fakhri. Being poor is my honor. Is that what you see when you go to the Middle East? You don't see that. You don't see people living a simple life. Again, these signs have been fulfilled. You know, when we talk to our Muslim brothers and sisters, non-MD Muslim brothers and sisters, oftentimes I get to hear this, that, you know, how come you know more Islam than the Arabs? Arabs are the ones who were the primary addressee of the religion of Islam. The religion of Islam's official language, the Arabic, is their language. Quran was revealed in their language. How can you claim to know more than them? But then look at their own conduct, their own moral state that they're in. This is why Allah the Almighty did not choose a single Arab to represent Holy Prophet ﷺ and Islam in this day and age. Rather, Allah the Almighty chose a man from a tiny village of India, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian alayhi salatu wasalam, who was pious in the eyes of Allah the Almighty. And he is the Imam Mahdi who came in this world and laid the foundation for the world peace. The next sign that has been mentioned in the books of Hadith is that in that time, indecency would be at its peak. Now the word indecency in Arabic has been explained by the usage of the word tafahush, which literally means things that are to do with one's sexual desires and things related to pornography. Now again, the rise of such material, the rise of such indecency in our society that now has become rampant, has only become rampant within the last, few decades. Again, fulfilling this sign which was foretold by Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And look, this is what was mentioned by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because Allah was the one who showed it to him, revealed it to him, that this would be the condition of people at the time of Messiah and Imam Mahdi. People would boast about their physical encounters. The girlfriend-boyfriend concept is exactly that. And living in the West, our youth, and by our youth I'm referring to the youth in general, the Western youth, they boast about this, that how many partners that they've been with before they get to the point of marriage. This is exactly what Holy Prophet ﷺ foretold, that would be the condition. Look at the number of single parents or teenage pregnancies just in United States alone. To make this point that Holy Prophet ﷺ, what he mentioned, has indeed been fulfilled. Another sign that has been mentioned is the increase in the consumption of alcohol. But there is a very significant phrase that Holy Prophet ﷺ used. He said, in that time, alcohol would be consumed on the way. while you're traveling, alcohol would be consumed. How many times have you noticed that when you're traveling through an airport, you see bars? You're literally traveling and you see bars. Now take it to the next level. You're flying. You're flying, and in flight they're serving alcohol beverages. There was a time when alcohol would be sold, maybe there might be a shop here and might be another shop after several miles later. Now literally you walk outside and every single mall, every single place where there are shops, you'll find at least one place that would be selling alcohol. It has become that much commonplace. Again, literally fulfilling what was mentioned in the Ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, Muslims are no saints in this day and age, unfortunately. They're partaking from these things. Muslim countries are selling alcohol in their hotels and so on and so forth. Another sign that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned he said, people would appoint dishonest people as their leaders, and the honest people would be disregarded. Meaning, the honest people would have no worth, and the dishonest people would be regarded as the best of the leaders. Again, I don't necessarily need to go in detail. One could imagine what the Holy Prophet ﷺ is speaking of. We see that happening all around us. Now this is another very significant sign. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned is that in that specific time frame, a person would be highly disrespectful towards his parents or her parents, but somehow would be extremely kind and loving towards his or her friends. Think about this. The youth of this day and age, you need to think about this. Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned that you would be treating your parents in the most derogatory way, in the most insanest of the ways possible, in the most insulting manners. But when it would be about your friends, you would be most loyal to them, most respectful to them. I read an article the other day in which it was mentioned that there was this young man, his parents belonged to a very poor family. His father worked his entire youth making whatever little amount of money that he could so that his son could become a respected member of the society, a learned person. His mother gave up her youth taking care of her child. When the same child grew up, you know what he did? He was embarrassed to show his illiterate parents in front of his friends. And he would try to avoid his parents in front of his friends. Again, we see these signs being fulfilled that Holy Prophet ﷺ had spoken of. And believe you me, this is happening around us as well. This is happening around us as well. Where if the mother says something to her son or to her daughter, she gets quickly agitated. She becomes angry. But when you talk to them about their friends, they become personal. And they say, oh, don't say anything about my friend. This is the sorry state of affairs, unfortunately. Another sign was, يُرْفَعُ الْعِلْمُ وَيَظْهَرُ الْجَهْلُ, that knowledge would be raised from this world. It would be gone. And ignorance will take its place. Now, of course, Holy Prophet ﷺ did not say that secular knowledge would be taken away from this world. What is mentioned is the spiritual knowledge. Look at the time of the promised Messiah ﷺ. Muslims were literally cutting each other's throats simply because one sect believed that you were supposed to say Ameen out loud after Surah Fatiha, while the other sect said, no, you're not. And if the member of one sect ended up unknowingly or knowingly in the mosque of the other sect, and God forbid if he ended up saying Ameen out loud, or he did not say Ameen out loud, depending on which sect, mosque did he end up at, they would literally kill him. They were fighting about if you're supposed to raise your finger when you're sitting in tashahhud. And people's fingers were being chopped off. This was their state of affairs. Literally, what the Holy Prophet ﷺ was shown by Allah the Almighty came true word for word. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ has mentioned. Look at this. Rasul Kareem ﷺ mentioned that in that time, when Muslims would meet one another, they would greet not with Assalamu alaikum, but rather they would greet one another by using swear words. Not my words. This is exactly what is mentioned in the Hadith. The yo culture, where our youth are addressing one another by calling them the names of animals and whatnot. This was a sign that has been fulfilled. Another sign that Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned is that women would dress up, but despite the fact that they would dress up, it would appear as if they're still naked. Now, this hadith, this prophecy is talking about see-through clothing. Or the fact where now in the West, even though women dress, but more than 2/3 of their body is uncovered. So although they might be dressed, but it appears as if they are not. Look at how the prophecy, how the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are being fulfilled. Our beloved Imam Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis Ayyadahullah bin Nasr Aziz, the fifth Khalifa to Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam, has mentioned, specifically referring to our women, that they should avoid such burqas or such coats that are, number one, see-through, or that are beating the entire purpose for which a person dresses up modestly. Another sign that Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned is that in that time there will be women and they would wear their hair in such a way as if it would appear as if they're carrying a basket on their head. As if they're carrying a basket on their head. Think about that. Now, even men are doing that. They grow their hair long and then they make something which is now called man bun. They make that round circular thing in the back of their head. This was the other sign which I'm going to share, where Holy Prophet mentioned men would dress up like women and women would dress up like men. Now we see men piercing their ears or growing their hair or not keeping any facial hair, literally resembling the opposite gender. And then we see women doing the opposite, whereby they dress up like men, they act like men, again fulfilling the sign of the latter days as was mentioned by Holy Prophet ﷺ. So there are many, many more signs. There's one sign that talks about the invention of dish antennas. There are many more signs, but since time is of the essence, I will inshallah ta'ala continue this subject at another point. At this, I'll end today's dars. We have about 4 minutes or so, in which I would request everyone to please join me in silent prayer, join me in dua. After which we will go outside and wait for the azan. When the azan is called, then we will inshallah break our fast. Please join me in silent prayer. Dua. Ameen.